2, 1.
Welcome. My name is Mark Depew. I'm the Director of Oral History with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. And today I'm excited to have with me Harriet Tubman. How are you, Harriet?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Mr. Depew, for having me today.
Well, you know, I just heard that recently Sarah Bradford, I believe a good Quaker lady, has had an opportunity to interview you, and she just published a book in 1869 about your life.
Yes, she did.
So I'm going to cover a lot of the same territory that she covered in that interview, but thrilled that you agreed to do this with us, and thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome, kind sir, and I have the book with me.
Oh, my.
This is it. It's a very nice book.
Yeah.
I can't read it, but it's a very nice book.
Well, somebody obviously has been reading it. It's already pretty well worn. Wondered if you could start with where I like to start all my interviews and tell us a little bit about your background and specifically when and where you were born.
Well, I was born in Dorchester County, Maryland, somewhere around 1820. Might have been 1821, 1822. 1823, because you see, I was born a slave, and nobody cares about a slave having a birthday. But nevertheless, I was born in Dorchester County on Master Brodus's plantation.
What do you know about your parents?
Well, I know them very well because they still live with me, even today. We were there as a family on Master Brodus's plantation. My mama's name was Harriet Green Ross, and my papa's name was Benjamin Ross. And we lived right there in a little cabin on Master Brodus's plantation with my sisters and my brothers. We all lived there.
Do you know much about their own background, their own history?
Whose history now?
Your parents.
Oh, the only thing I remember my mama saying was that she was pure African. There wasn't not one drop of white blood flowing through her veins or those of my papa. So I guess I'm African as well.
Okay. How much do you remember about your early childhood?
About the only thing I remember from childhood was not a very good memory, Mr. Depew. But I remember I was watching Miss Susie's baby. She had a little baby in a crib. I was supposed to watch her. Now, I'm like 6 or 7 years old myself, and my job as a slave child was to watch the baby. Well, the baby's come to crying and just crying and crying. She wouldn't shut up, and I was rocking her, and I rocked her so hard, kind of tipped over the cradle, the crib there. Of course, now, Miss Susie got very angry. She beat me, told me never to come in the house no more. So that wasn't a good memory, but I thought it was kind of not too good that me, a child of 6 or 7, having to take care of a baby.
Well, I understand there was a time very early in your life also that you ran away.
Well, I didn't run away. My friend tried to run away. You see, Master Brodus, this was when I was like a teenager, 12, 13, somewhere along in there. Master Brodus had sent me and my friend, after all these years, I can't rightly recall his name, so I'll just call him Sam. Sent me and Sam into town to the general store to get some provisions, you know, for the plantation. Flour, sugar, things like that. And come to find out as me and Sam was walking there, Sam told me that he had had an urge to be free. Now, he was telling me about his plan and what he wanted to try to do while we was in the general store. And he said, Harriet, you, I guess you would say, you keep the attention. That'd be a good word, wouldn't you think? Of the storekeep, while I try to make a run out the back door of the store into the woods and get on the road to freedom. Well, I thought that sounded like a pretty good plan to me, so I tried to do what Sam wanted me to do, and while we was in the store, I was just kind of talking to the storekeep and trying to keep his attention on me, but he was kind of looking at Sam, because Sam was kind of just hanging around and looking kind of odd. I guess I don't know the other word to call it. And I guess the storekeep kind of got an inkling as to what we was trying to do, so he picked up a weight you know, the weight they put on the scale. It weighed about 3, 4 pounds. Picked it up and hurled it at Sam, trying to stop him from going out the back door. Well, didn't hit Sam, hit me in the head, knocked me plumb out. Yes, it did, and I still have a scar. That's why I wear this scarf all the time, because I have a scar. Knocked me plumb out. Caused me to suffer from what my mama called the sleeping sickness, you see. And I would just kind of fall asleep at the drop of a hat. After that happened to me, and from that wound, my mama nursed me and whatnot, but Master Broder said I wasn't worth a plug nickel no more. Said I wasn't even fit to be sold. So, but my mama, she nursed me back. And I got to be strong and good, but I never did, like I said before. I never did work no more in the house. I worked out in the fields with my papa.
Well, that had to be hard work. How tall are you?
Well, I don't rightly know. How tall is you?
Well, I'm taller than you. I'm about 6 foot, and I've heard that you're about 5 feet tall.
Something like that. That sounds about right, but you know, I don't.
But you had a prodigious nature of working hard.
I had a what?
Yeah, you could work hard in the fields from what I heard.
Yes, sir, I could. In fact, my master, I thought it was rather unkind of him. He tied a belt, rope, not sure what you would call it, like a girdle around me, had me pulling logs on the river, on the bay right there, on the Chesapeake, close by where we lived, you know. But he was so proud that I was strong enough to do that, and the men standing around watching, they was cheering. They was cheering because they never seen such a strong woman as me. Now, I didn't think that was very good, but that's what Master told me to do, so I didn't have no choice but to do it.
Well, I think I know the answer to this next question, but...
Well, then why you gonna ask it?
Well, I want to hear your answer. Did you get any education?
Education? I'm a slave. Now, you know it's against the law, teach a slave how to read and write. Of course, now there are some that can, but their masters or whoever taught them, they usually get in a heap of trouble. They did at that time. That was, you know, before the war.
Did you live with your parents most of this time?
Mm-hmm. I lived with my parents, and you talking about during my growing up days.
Right, right.
Yes, we was one of the lucky families that, well, we didn't all get to stay together because Master Brodus on one New Year's Day sold off two of my sisters. Sold them off to the deep south. I have never seen them again in life, even to this day.
How difficult was that for your parents and for you?
It was very hard. How'd you like to have somebody that you love growed up with be sold away from you? How'd you like to be sold, period?
Did you get any religion growing up?
I'm a very religious woman even to this day. I have a strong faith in the good Lord. I have a very strong faith in the good Lord because he has kept me all these years. All these years.
Was that something your parents made sure you knew about, that they were teaching about?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we had a little preacher man on the neighboring plantation come around, and we'd have meetings and whatnot, and he'd teach us about the word. So, and my mama and my papa, they was believers. They still is believers. You know, that word and that belief and that faith, I reckon is what you can call it, it helped us get through a lot of hard, bad times. Mm-hmm. Being a slave was hard.
Of all the different things about being a slave, what do you think was the most difficult for you?
It was all difficult. In looking back at it and thinking about it, I guess the most difficult thing was not being in charge of your person. You can't be in charge of yourself. You understand what I'm trying to say? Somebody always telling you what to do, how to do it, when to do it. You can't make no choice for yourself. You don't have no Right. You don't have no control of your own body or your mind, for that matter. Somebody else is always doing your thinking for you, you see.
How about one of the more important things in life, getting married? Did you have any choice of that? Were you ever married?
Well, yes. What else you want to know? In fact, I'm on husband number 2 right now. We've just been married a short time, but I'm on husband number 2 right now. I guess you want to know what happened to husband number 1.
Yeah, I want to know about husband number 1. First of all, I understand you weren't born with the name Harriet Tubman. What was your birth name?
My slave name. My slave name was Araminta Ross. Araminta. Folks used to call me Minty for short. But you see, when I decided that I was going to be free, I took the name of Harriet to honor my mother. I took it because I was free and I could do what I wanted to. And I wanted to honor myself by calling me after my mama's name, which was Harriet. Now, you asked me something else, but I forgot what it was.
Well, how'd you get Tubman?
How'd I get to Tubman? Well, back in 1847, I was married to a man whose name was John Tubman. Now, John Tubman was a free man. John Tubman lived on a nearby plantation. He belonged to someone else. But over time, John Tubman had raised or saved or whatever, got enough money to buy his own freedom, probably about $400 or so, buy his freedom from his master. Now, John Tubman, he took a liking to me. He come courting and come calling. Of course, now, he did that with the permission of Master Brodus, you know. And so Master Brodus gave his permission for me and John Tubman to marry up. So in 1847, like I said, we married up in the slave way. Now, do you know what that means?
No.
If you get married up in the slave way, that means you jump the broom. Now, my mama, I told you her name was Harriet Green Ross. My mama told me that jumping the broom was one of the, how would you call it? I believe she called it a tradition that come with us from Africa when they brung us all the way over here all them years ago. I believe it was in the 1600s when the first of us come to this country. Well, my mama said that back when she was in Africa, and well, she wasn't, but that's where she come from. When folks got married, they would jump over the broom. And that would let everybody know that they was married. Now, we kept that tradition, even though the masters took away our language, our religion, the way we dress and everything else. But they allowed us to keep that tradition of jumping the broom because I guess it wouldn't hurt nothing. How's jumping over a broom gonna hurt anything? So me and John Tubman, we married up in that way in 1847. But in 1849, when I decided that I was going to be free, because I told you John Tubman was a free man. When I decided I was going to be free, I said to John Tubman, do you want to be free with me on free soil? John Tubman said he was already free, so he wasn't going nowhere. I said, well, I ain't free, so I left.
I'm curious, how does it work that your husband is free and you're not free? You continue to work for your master. He had no obligations to a master at all?
He had an obligation to his master, his former master, you better believe that. Because even though he was a free man, he hired himself out. Now, do you know what hiring out is? Okay. He hired himself out, and with the money that he got paid, he gives some to the master and keeps some for himself, you know. Because he had to give some to the master for, I guess you'd call it room and board and upkeep and all of that, and then he kept a few dollars or whatever for his own self. Now, me and John Tubman, because I'm a slave. You know, folks say when you get married, you belong to your husband, you belong to your wife. I belong to Master Brodus. That's who I belong to. So Master Brodus, he have to give permission, even though me and John Tubman is married, for him to come call and spend time and all of that with me. He had to get Master Brodus's or his own ex-master's permission to spend time. And of course, when he comes see me, I always have to have a pass on him to allow him to be off of that property, and also a pass that says that he's a free man of color.
Was there any talk of him purchasing your freedom ever?
No, John Tubman, I think he was just content to be free where he was at.
I know you didn't have any children. What would have happened if you did have children?
Well, how would you call it? The place of the child. I think the word would be the status. The status of the child is determined by the status of the mother. So if I'm having a child and I'm a slave, my child is a slave too, you see.
Okay. Well, let's get to that important decision then. And you said it was, I believe, 1849?
In 1849, that's when I decided to be free.
What led to that decision?
Well, I told you that I'd seen my sister sold off on a New Year's Day, and I didn't want that to happen to me. So...
Was there some talk that that might happen?
Yes, because there's always talk between that Christmas time and New Year's. That's when most of the traders come by and buy slaves. Everybody knows that that's most time that the traders come to get new property.
Yeah, and I hate to put it this way, but in economic terms, I understand.
In what kind of terms?
In terms of money terms.
Oh, okay.
That Maryland was a state, an area that had, shall we say, a lot of extra slaves, and so the slave traders from the South, where they were needed more, would come there.
They would come there because, you know, they was having, right, they needed more slaves in the South to raise the crops, the cotton, the rice, tobacco, and all of that. That was needed right there in Maryland. Now, you see, Master Brodus, his, aside from us as his property that he could sell, he made his money not too good because he wasn't a very good, what would you call it, businessman? He wasn't very good at that. He made his money from the woods, the timber, the lumber, you see. That's how he got his money. But if he needed a little bit more, he'd just sell off another slave. He had less than probably 20 of us on his. I guess he was a small-time planter, I guess is what you'd call it.
When you're thinking of contemplating about escaping...
Thinking and contemplating. Good word. I'll remember that.
Did you hear about other slaves that had been successful to get up north? How much did you know about it in the first place?
Well, I know one thing, and that was I wanted to be free. I never have experienced freedom when I was thinking about it, but I thought it would be a good thing to be in charge of your own person. And, you know, with the slaves who was able to go off the plantation with a pass for master, you know, they would go into town and hear and see other slaves from other plantations. Of course, word get around that there was something called a railroad, underground railroad, that you could get on to get to freedom. And these folks who was against this slavery thing called abolitionists. And we heard about them right there in Maryland and right there in Dorchester County. We heard of these things, and there was a lady on a neighboring plantation, a white lady, and she was friendly toward me. And in my early teenage years, 15, 16 years old and so, she told me that if ever one day I wanted to make a break to get to freedom, to come to her, and she'd help me along the way. Now, at the time, I didn't really understand that she was a station master, is what we call them, on the railroad, but that's what she was right there in Maryland, because she was against the slavery thing. But she told me if I wanted to do that, try to get to freedom, she'd help me.
Was this something that you had planned for a long time, or was it kind of a spur-of-the-moment decision to actually
It was
escape?
a little bit of both. I had thought about it, but I had to get my courage up and figure out the right time to do it. In fact, I wanted to do it and take my brothers with me, but when the time came, they decided against it. So I just took out on my own. We got so far along and they decided they wanted to turn back. But I was determined that I was going to keep on going.
Were these younger brothers?
Yes, I was one younger and one older.
Okay.
But they was my brothers.
Okay. What time of year is the right time to do this?
Of course, there's always the right time to be free. Every day is the right time if you're going to be free. But usually in the spring, because the days and the light last longer than in the wintertime. Plus in the wintertime, even in Maryland and places, it gets a little chilly. So the spring and the summer is the best time because it's the longest day and the light lasts longer.
How much do you remember about your escape then? How much can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you that trip, if you can call it a trip, the trip that I took from Dorchester County, Maryland, was to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia, where I was truly free. Took me about 3 months because it was mostly on foot. And it was hard being out there by yourself. But along the way, I would stop at houses that people had told me would be safe for me to stop at. And the person who was there, who was a kindly abolitionist person, would tell me about where to go for the next safe stop on like that. So it took a while, hiding and being in the swamps, because that part of Maryland is kind of swampy. Got lots of swamps and creeks and streams and all that. Hiding in the tall grasses sometimes, hiding in a barn. I even rode in a truck I don't know if you would call it a truck, the back part of a wagon with the boards on it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like that. I even rode covered up with potatoes as a way to be hid out of sight. So who would think a person would be hiding in a wagon loaded with potatoes?
That's a long time to basically living on your own. The food that you had was primarily from people who were kind enough to help you out?
And the things that growed in the forest and the woods and the swamps and all those things. And that I learned that from my papa. You see, I told you I worked out with my papa back in the trees, in the forest, wherever. And he taught me about the kind of plants that you could eat, the kind of plants that was good for medicinal purposes, and the kind of plants you better stay away from because they'll kill you. Now, I learned that as a young child, well, teenager-like, and I never had any idea that would come to my usefulness when I was on the railroad, so to speak.
How did you know you were going in the right direction?
Well, the right direction is north. You just look up there in that sky and you see that North Star. Keep your eye on it. Now, if it's an overly cloudy night, then you might have a little bit of a problem. But sometimes in the woods and the swamps and just out there, there'll be moss growing on the trees. And the moss grow on the north side of the tree because the moss have to grow in a place where it's kind of cool and wet. So that's kind of what you do.
What would have happened to you if you had been captured?
I won't even, speculate to say. But I can tell you this. It wouldn't have been a pretty sight. I'm sure that slaves, even me, who was caught as fugitives, be beat, probably be sold off. I've heard of slaves who ran off and got caught, have their feet chopped off so they can't run. I've heard of that. Of course, if you ain't got no feet, you can't run. Of course, if you ain't got no feet, you ain't too much use to your master either, because ain't too much you can do.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Had you ever been beaten yourself by your master?
Well, like I said, Miss Susie beat me when I dumped the child out of the cradle, the crib, whatever, yeah. But
It sounds like you worked your way through Maryland and into Pennsylvania from Maryland then?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You remember the feeling you had once you got to free land?
Got to free land. Now, I don't want you to laugh, Mr. Depew, but I'm going to tell you. I looked at my hands. I looked at my feet. Same hands, same feet, except for one thing. They was free! And such a glory come over me. It was almost more than I could stand. It really was. I looked the same, but I certainly felt different.
Well, after that first experience and your feelings that you have, you still have to figure out how to survive. So what did you do?
Well, right there in Philadelphia, which is where I went to, there was a man that I was told along the way that I should look for, and his name was Mr. William Steele. Mr. William Steele was a free Negro. He was also an important Negro because Mr. Steele was the secretary to the Anti-Slavery Society, the Vigilance Committee, right there in Philadelphia. But more than that, Mr. Steele was a station master on the Underground Railroad. So when I got to Philadelphia, I managed to find him. And also in Philadelphia, there was a community, I guess you would call it, of free people of color. Free people of color, never been slaves, never been slaves. Can you imagine? They had never been slaves, and they was black just like me. And so, working with the folks that is in Mr. Steele's group and the free people of color, you kind of learn. They try to teach you how to take care of yourself, and they certainly try to help you, And while I was there in Philadelphia, I stayed there for about 2 years. Haven't got there in, I got there in about 1849, 1850, thereabouts. And I stayed there for a couple of years, and while I was there, I hired myself out as a cook and a washerwoman. And I also made very good pies that I would sell. And with the money, I'd keep some for myself and give some to Mr. Steele, because he was also telling me about how the Underground Railroad worked.
Well, you've mentioned the Underground Railroad several times here, and I think you need to help us understand exactly what that is and what a station master in the Underground Railroad would be.
Well, first of all, you have to remember that the Underground Railroad is neither underground nor a railroad. But people have asked, why do they call it that? And I've learned from Mr. Steele, who's a very smart colored man, that the railroad come to pass about the same time that the real railroad with, I believe they call them locomotives, come to pass. And I believe that was in the 1830s, that the railroad started to be a way of transportation. And the Underground Railroad is a way of transportation from slavery to freedom. And they call it underground because you're not supposed to know that much about it. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
There was a man, we called him the president of the Underground Railroad. His name is Levi Coffin. I've only heard of him because I've never been to Ohio, and that's where he lives. But he's the one that kind of figured out and got all this started. He was a fine Quaker abolitionist man. Mm-hmm.
Is this Underground Railroad both in slave states and in free states?
Of course, there's people in slave states who don't necessarily believe in slavery. So yes, that's how you would get your help, was from those. That wasn't a whole lot of them, of course, but there was some who was in agreement with what the abolitionists and those who wanted to get rid of slavery thought.
So if Mr. Steele is a station master, is that like a house or some place that slaves would come to and get some help?
Yes, it's a safe house. And they call it the station master because the person who's in charge of the railroad, in the real life railroad, they call them station masters, and the people who work for the railroad, they's agents. Now me, I was a conductor because I was in charge. The conductor on the railroad is in charge of the people on the train. And we call those people passengers because, you see, it all kind of ties together.
But you're not, as you said before, it's not a railroad, so how are you moving from one station to the other?
Mostly by foot. But sometimes, you know, if you have to get across a stream or a creek or something like that, there'll be a kind of abolitionist person. Now, you have learned this over time, that a person who lives at this house by this creek or by this stream, he has a boat, and he can put you in it, and you can get in, he'll row you to your next station. That's how that works. The railroad mostly worked by word of mouth. Ain't nothing wrote down. Of course, it wouldn't be no good if it was wrote down for me, nohow, because I can't read it. But anyway, there's some abolitionists who would write stuff and tell you stuff, but I had to mostly just listen. My papa told me I had a memory like a steel trap, that once you tell me something, I'm going to remember it. That's what helped me get from place to place, and the good Lord, of course, him having his hand on me, because it is my belief, even to this day, that the good Lord called me to do this work. And where the good Lord leads you, he will not leave you, and he has never left me yet.
Well, I think it must be one thing to actually get to freedom, but were you concerned that you might be recaptured and taken south? Philadelphia is not that far north of the border.
No, it's not. But yes, that's always a fear. And when we got that Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, that was only like a year after I made my escape. It made things even worse, because that law said that even if a slave was captured on free soil, he could still be sold back into slavery. So if you want to look at it in the largest sense, there wasn't nowhere in all of the United States that an escaped slave could truly be free. There wasn't nowhere because of that Fugitive Slave Law.
That must be why so many then decided to head into Canada instead.
Absolutely. Canada was what they call the terminus. That's a big word. The terminus, that means the end. And that's what they call the final stop on a train, the terminus. So that was the end of the Underground Railroad. It rolled all the way up into Canada because, you see, Canada had outlawed slavery years before it was done here in these United States. So we know that Canada was safe. There was places that you could get to Canada from New York, and I understand there's a place out west in a place called Michigan, where right across from a city called Detroit, I've never been there, right across the street, not across the street, across, I guess that'd be a lake, I'm told, is Canada, Windsor. So Detroit City become a good stopping place for people ready to get over into Canada too.
Well, it's one thing to learn about, and from all your connections in Philadelphia, learning about the Underground Railroad and how it worked. It's quite something else to decide that you're going to be you're going to help out yourself.
Right.
What led to that decision to go back south?
Well, when I got there to Philadelphia and was so glad that I was there and was free, it occurred to me, I realized I didn't have no one to share my happiness with about being free. So I suppose that's what made me want to go back. I told you that when I left the first time, I wanted to take my brothers, but they decided they didn't want to go. But when I made my first trip back in 1851, back into Master Brodus's plantation, that was one of the first places I went back to, was to get my brothers. And also while I was there, I thought I'd see if old John Tubman was still around. Well, he was, but he had took up with another woman, so that was all of me and John Tubman. But me and my brothers, we went on, and they went on to freedom and got there to Philadelphia.
But it can't be anywhere near as simple as you just explained it. You can't just walk onto the plantation and say, hey, come follow me.
No, that ain't the way it happened. It wasn't that simple. Wasn't that simple. It was a lot of risk and a lot of danger. You see, I would send word to those folks that I trusted. And over time, well, on the first time, I guess I pretty much went back almost the same way that I left the first time, almost. But I still got word from people who was in support of what I was doing. I would send word to them that I was going to be at such and such a place at such and such a time. And if you wanted to ride with me on the Freedom Line, that was the name of the railroad too, the Freedom Line, then you show up. But if you come, you have to take orders from me, so to speak.
Can you tell us after that first one, what made you decide to do more of these?
Because more people needed to be free. Simple as that.
Were a lot of these your relatives or people that you knew?
Some of them was my relatives and some of them was not. It don't matter if you my relative. If you want to be free and you want to get to freedom, then you come and travel with me to freedom.
Did you go back then year after year over the next several years?
I went several times. Now, I can neither read nor write nor cipher. Do you know what ciphering is?
Yeah, adding and subtracting.
Right, and counting, period. I never did keep no record. Well, I can't write, so how could I keep a record? But folks have told me since the end of the war that I probably went 12, 13 times maybe, something like that. I never was keeping count necessarily.
Which means in some years you were doing this more than once a year.
Right, and in some years. And sometimes I had big groups, maybe 15 or 20 folks, and sometimes I only had like 2 on my last trip when I got my mom and my papa.
Oh, okay. What was the year of your last trip? Do you recall?
In 1859, 1860, somewhere along in there. Okay. That was when I took my last trip.
Shortly before the war itself. Can you describe for us what a typical trip would be? And trip is the wrong word to use, isn't it?
No, it's on the railroad, so it would be a trip. It would be a trip.
How would you describe a typical trip, right from the beginning all the way through?
That's a mighty good question, Mr. Depew, because I don't think none of the trips was typical. They was all different. You can't go the same way all the time because people would be expecting you and looking for you if you go the same way. But there was sometimes you'd have little babies in arms. Sometimes you have older people that might have infirmities, you know. So it was all different. But we had to stay together. People had to do what I said for the safety of all, you see. I had the pleasure of meeting John Brown, for instance, one time, and he called me General Tubman because he said I was in charge. Well, you know, he was going to do that raid down there at Harper's Ferry, I believe. Me and Frederick, that's Frederick Douglass. You know of him too?
Oh, we sure do.
Me and Frederick met up with John Brown up in Canada West when he was plotting, I guess, arranging for his overthrow, for lack of a better term, of slavery in the South. You know, his plan was to arm all of the slaves, and they just going to kill the masters. Well, me and Frederick, we weren't that much about the violent way to end slavery. But that's what John Brown wanted to do, and he thought that I would be helpful since I knowed a lot about the way things were in the South and the bridges and the land, the lay of the land, so to speak, and how to get through places and from one point to another. I guess he was asking me because of, this might sound funny, because of my knowledge of the geography and the typography of the area.
Oh, there's a couple big words.
Yes, somebody told me those words. Because that's what they said, that they would, what my good part in that was because of that knowledge of geography and topography. But nevertheless, well, you know what happened to John Brown. He didn't come to a very good end. But I tell you this, John Brown was a martyr for the cause of abolition, for the end of slavery, and he was a martyr to my people.
Were most of these trips you took back into Maryland, or did you go into Virginia or other states as well?
I went as far south as North Georgia. So that passed by the Carolinas and Virginia, don't it?
Sure does.
And then points north on the eastern shore of Maryland and on up into Canada.
Well, how did you move around in these areas?
Because I was good.
How do you remain undetected, where people don't know what you're up to?
Now, I'm not saying that people didn't know what I was up to, because there was wanted posters for me. Long about in 1855 or so. That's when I was doing some of my best work. Those Maryland plantation owners, they had a reward. They had a bounty for my capture. They had them posters, wanted, Harriet Tubman, dead or alive.
You said there was a reward. What was the dollar figure for that, do you know?
Well, that reward money started off at about $12,000.
Wow.
But by the time 1855 come, that money had grown all the way to $40,000. But you know what? Nobody never did claim it, because nobody never could catch me. Now, I'm going to tell you why. It's because I, Harriet Tubman, I never run my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger. All of those who traveled with me, they all got to freedom. Yes, sir, they did.
How did you dress so that you could stay kind of unnoticed in the rest of society?
Kind of disguised. Like I said, I always wear this scarf on my head because I have a scar. And you know, when you have a wanted poster, the sheriff or the constable or whatever you call him, they always want to know, does that person have any marks or anything, you know, that would help identify him. That's why I covered up with a scarf. So sometimes I would wear big hats that kind of shadowed my face so you couldn't see it. I'd sometimes dress as a man also, have on breeches. Try to just fit in. Don't draw no attention to myself or nothing of that nature. So I did have to do things like that.
Did you carry any weapons with you?
Now, if I am in charge of a bunch of people and we are out in the woods and out in the world with no help, basically from nobody but the good Lord, Of course, I had to have a little bit of protection. I had a rifle, and I also carried in my bag a pistol. Now, I will tell you this, Mr. Depew. I never had to shoot none of my passengers, because sometimes my passengers would come up to me and they'd say, Miss Tubman, I'm cold, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm scared, I want to go back to master. Now, what you think gonna happen to a slave that's been with me when he go back to master? He probably gonna get beat. He's gonna be asking questions. Where's Harriet? Who's with her? Where's she going? How many is it? Where's she been? And while all that's going on, the slave tongue probably gonna get to wagging, and he gonna get to talking. Then after that, Underground Railroad won't be secret no more. So when my passengers talk that kind of foolishness, I have to reach in my bag and pull out my friendly persuader, and I say to that person, live free or die. All of a sudden, they don't be tired. They don't be cold. They don't be hungry. They just want to keep on walking for the cause of freedom. So like I said, I never had to shoot none of my passengers, but I did a whole lot of intimidating. That's part of the reason that John Brown called me General Tubman, because I was in charge.
I assume when you first mentioned you had a pistol with you, that that wasn't to shoot passengers, that was to shoot those who might be chasing you.
You are very smart.
So did you ever have to shoot at anybody who was chasing after you?
Oh, well, yes, I had to fire my pistol, but I wasn't a very good shot at shooting and killing that person. But I kind of scared them off and gave us a little bit more room to run.
Did they ever send the dogs after you?
Of course, but we had a trick for that. We'd put pepper on the bottom of our feet. If we was lucky, we might have had some shoes that we'd put some pepper, rubbed it in real good into the sole of it. And of course, a dog sniffed that, well, then they just get to sneezing and they can't keep up with you because they be too busy sneezing. And you can be running.
On your way south, you mentioned before that for the Negroes to be moving around, you'd oftentimes need to have a pass. Did you have passes sometimes?
Oh, well, not when I was on the railroad, but when I did work in the war, because I did work in the war for the cause of the Union, I would get passes from the generals to allow me to do what? To ride on a train even, to give me clear passage to get to wherever they wanted me to go to get information, because I was a spy, so to speak, for the Union Army. Who would ever expect a little black woman to be a spy for the Union Army? Hardly anybody would ever think that. So I was good at that. What did you ask me? I forgot.
Well, I wanted to ask you another question here, and we'll just move on. We were talking about passes.
Oh, yes, you had to have the pass to have permission to be off of your master's plantation. And then you would have to have your freedom papers if you was a free person to be, just because anybody could, any white person that is, could stop you for whatever reason that they wanted to. And if you couldn't either show them a pass or a freedom paper, well, you know how that story's liable to end up. But then your freedom paper is what? A piece of paper. All they got to do is tear it up. And then where's it at? And whose word is they going to believe? Yours or mine? I believe you have the upper hand.
Did you always move by foot, or did you move these, especially when you had groups and had women and children and babies along with you?
It was truly mostly by foot, but sometimes, people would know, or the word would go out that I'm in the area, and so the abolitionists who are supportive of what I'm doing, they would make it so for example, if they had a wagon, they would put some kind of sign on it that would let us know that this is okay. Maybe it'd be a cross, or maybe it'd be a bear, whatever it was, to let us know that that wagon was going to be for our use, you see. And it usually have a cover on it of some kind, or it might have, like I said for myself, might be full of vegetables, potatoes, or something like that, and we just have to get in there and be covered up. Simple as that.
That occurred even in places like the Carolinas and into northern Georgia. There were people even that far south who were helping.
Supportive, yes.
Okay. You also mentioned babies, and I'm wondering how you control babies when they start to make noise and cry.
Very hard, very hard. But I told you that my papa, when I was coming up, taught me about medicines, that plants that you could use as medicines that you can boil down, like chamomile and stuff like that, to make a tea. But when I was in Philadelphia there with Mr. Steele, there would be Quaker abolitionist doctors who would give me little bottles of medicine that I could keep in my bag. Sometimes it might be something called paregoric. You ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
It's a medicinal, and if you mix it with a little water or make a tea, then if you give it to the baby, it makes them very quiet. Now, have you ever heard of something called laudanum? And that would be what? What do you know laudanum to be, sir?
Well, I was going to let you describe that.
Oh, well.
A little bit of a depressant or...
Well, it's kind of like a opium, morphine, those kinds of drugs, medicinals. And if you put that in a tea, it's going to make you kind of drowsy and quiet you and still your nerves a little bit. So that might not be very good care for babies, but if the babies want to be free, and you know their mamas and their papas want them to be free, they're going to allow you to do that because you're trying to get to freedom. Freedom is the most important thing. And so you just do. Now, see, when people come to sign on with me, they have to do as I say.
Well, that leads to the next question then. How did you end up deciding who the passengers were going to be?
I didn't decide. They decide, because I don't think that I should say, you can come, but you got to stay. You can come, you got to stay. I think it's probably one of the first things that a slave had ever decided on his own, was whether or not he wanted to be free. You understand my meaning? Only you know if you want to take this risky and dangerous journey to freedom. Only you can decide. So I didn't decide. They decided themselves.
Okay. I think we'll decide to take a very quick break and we'll come back. And this has been a fascinating discussion. I'm looking to hear a lot more about it. Thank you, Harriet.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Depew.
Well, Harriet, it was nice to be able to take a quick break.
Yes, it was.
And when we talked before, the reason I was thinking here, you had mentioned that you had a problem with a sleeping sickness.
Yes, I did. That was when I got hit in the head with that rock. But when I got to Philadelphia, Mr. Steele, he had a kindly abolitionist Quaker doctor look at me, and he put a medical term on it, call it narcolepsy. Means you just kind of fall asleep at the drop of a hat, so to speak. Now, folks have asked me over the years if that narcolepsy, sleeping sickness, was ever a trouble to me when I was a conductor on the railroad, and I have thought about it, and I've decided. Must not have been no problem. And once again, it's because I, Harriet Tubman, I never run my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger, so I guess it wasn't no bother to me.
Okay, well, that was my question, so thank you very much. How about keeping all these people that you were bringing north with you fed?
Like I said, there in Philadelphia, you have the free African community, the free colored people community, who was very supportive of the fugitive slaves, so to speak. They was very supportive. Then you have churches in the colored community that would be supportive and very helpful as well. And then at the station there, that would be Mr. Steele's, he had a nice big house that people could stay in and sleep in. But the passengers were just kind of, not parceled out, but, you know, introduce them to other families who would watch over them. But then not everybody chose to stay there in Philadelphia. Some people, since they was free, they'd heard of places like New York and places in Rochester and Auburn and places like that, and they just maybe want to continue there because they knew or had heard and understood that they could also get help and support from those places.
If they went farther north, would you accompany them on those trips?
No, I would not. There would be other conductors who would finish and get them to whatever their final stop might be.
But in asking about what the passengers would eat, I was thinking about while you're still in the South.
While we was still traveling, we'd eat whatever we could find. Not only did I sometimes have a pistol, I also had a rifle, and I or some of my passengers who had some knowledge could maybe learn how to shoot a gun, shoot yourself a rabbit or a chicken or a squirrel or whatever kind of four-legged thing you might find that you thought you could eat. And then the greens and things that grows in the woods and the forest, those would be. And then, of course, when we stop at a safe house, the person who lives there, the abolitionist friend that we would have, they would give us some provisions, potatoes, bread, maybe some meat, dried meat or salted meat, something like that. They'd give us that.
I'm curious, when you actually had your passengers, after you picked up the passengers, were there ever occasions where you were traveling in plain sight and you just were kind of in disguise at the time?
Right. I recall one time when we was there in Wilmington, Delaware, we had stopped at the safe house that is run by my friend Thomas Garrett. Have you ever heard of Thomas Garrett?
Yes, I have.
He was a kindly, staunch Quaker abolitionist. And through his house there in Wilmington, over time, more than 250,000 over the years had his place as a safe house. Isn't that remarkable?
That's astounding.
It is. But you know, Thomas Garrett, he had, because everybody there in Wilmington knew he was an abolitionist. And of course, it's against the law to be an abolitionist. But, because if you was an abolitionist and was found out, you could be thrown in jail, have your property confiscated, be fined, all of those things. But Thomas Garrett, he said he didn't care. He was going to continue to fight and work for the abolition of slavery. And he was thrown in jail. His property was took away, all of that. But he was a staunch abolitionist. And I would often stop, not every time, because people get, you know, they might get too comfortable thinking that I'm going to come this way every time and set me up to get captured. So I didn't stop at Thomas Garrett's place every time. But anyway, I would go there this one particular time, and Thomas Garrett said that one of his abolitionist friends on the other side of town had some provisions for me and my passengers. But he said, Harriet, you have to go get them. So I said, sure. He told me how to get to wherever his friend lived, and I got there, and when I got there, the provisions was live chickens on the foot. So I put these live chickens on the foot in a little sack over my shoulder, and I start back to Friend Garrett's house. I call him Friend Garrett because he's a Quaker, and that's what they call themselves, friends. So I start over to Friend Garrett's house, and I see this little group of white men sitting, just talking, and they sitting in front of this store on benches, and right behind them was a poster. Now, I do not read or write, but I do know what I look like. And my likeness was on that poster. I believe it must have been one of them wanted signs. Well, I said, oh my, whatever am I going to do? Because they was just laughing and talking and whatever. So I decided, my mama had told me I was very quick on my feet to think. So I took that little bag with these live chickens fluttering around it and off my shoulder, and I just kind of let them run out. And they started flopping all around. And them white men just started laughing and laughing. Look at that little old colored lady chasing after them chickens. Little did they know that that little colored lady was the same lady whose likeness was on that poster up there, wanted Harriet Tubman. Well, I'll tell you something else, Mr. Depew. We didn't have no chicken for dinner that night. But I just kept on and just kind of wandered on off, chasing after them chickens, but they never knew that that was Harriet Tubman right there in front of them.
Did you have any other close calls you can tell us about?
Close calls don't count, and one is enough. But I did have others. I almost give myself away. I was sitting in a real railroad station, pretending to read the paper, but I told you I could neither read nor write. What give it away was I learned later that I had the paper upside down. But there wasn't nobody looking for me at that particular moment.
Any that involved some of the members of the group? You talked about how difficult it was sometimes to convince them that after they've been in the woods traveling at night for 4 or 5 days in a row and start getting hungry and tired and everything else. Mm-hmm. Any other stories to tell us about that? Well,
I don't believe so. I just guess that the best story to learn from all of this is that freedom is the most important thing. And that was the gold ring, so to speak, that we was all aiming to get. And those who traveled with me, they all got there.
Was there one thing in particular that you were most concerned about when you had the passengers and you were moving north, the thing that caused you the most concern?
I would believe that the thing that caused me the most concern was being caught. But it never happened. But it was always on my mind. It was always there. But like I said, I had good trust in the good Lord. And that sustained me, I guess, is the word.
You've been talking about a lot of these people who helped you. I'm wondering if you got help with money as well, or did you have to work when you came north to have enough money to go back south again?
Yes, folks would send, I guess you could call it my headquarters, so to speak, was right there with Mr. Steele there in Philadelphia. And folks would send money to him in my behalf. Well, even the Queen of England sent money at one point because of my work, even that far away. I believe her name was Victoria.
That would be right.
Mm-hmm. I believe that was what her name was, and she sent money for the work that I was doing because she believed in it as well. I thought that was mighty fine.
You are one of the best known women in the United States of America.
That kind of makes me blush.
I wonder if you saw that when you were doing your conducting work as an advantage or a great disadvantage.
It was not even on my mind. That kind of, what would you call it? Fame, notoriety. That wasn't why I was doing it. I did it because folks needed to be free. Folks needed to be free.
But obviously, if there's wanted posters wherever you go, that's not necessarily a good thing to be so well known.
That's very true too, Mr. Pugh. That's also very true. So how would you say it? Even though I tried to keep a low profile, but folks knew of my work because I did it more than once. And folks found it hard to believe that a colored woman would do what I did, not one time, not 2 times or 3 times, but on more than several occasions. But it was all for the cause of freedom.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you were okay that you were being used as an inspirational figure to motivate or inspire others to help with abolition as well?
Well, I never thought of it that way, but yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. The kind of a change of subject, but you've talked about knowing where the safe houses were. How did you know? Were there signals or other things that were used to let you
and others know? Yes, because like I had said earlier, it didn't do no good to put no writing to me because I couldn't read it, no way. But sometimes people would give us signals. There might be a lamp or a lantern, something burning up in the gable of a house, or there might be a curtain pulled back a certain way at a certain time of day and of a certain color. Somebody might hang a quilt on a line in a certain color or something. Just hang it out there or over the fence or something to let you know that this was a safe place for you to stop. There were various things of that nature that people would do.
Well, one of the things I've heard is about these quilts, that was a very involved, elaborate system that they would use to let people know. Is that truly the case?
I have seen a quilt hung on the line as a message, but I don't know more beyond about that.
So you think that might be a little bit more than actually occurred?
Probably it was. You know, when you look back at it in what you would call hindsight, there was probably a few more stories told to kind of yeast it up, so to speak. I believe some of that was probably happening. It makes the story sound better. But the things that I did, that was the truth.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that might embarrass you a little bit, but what made you personally, you, Harriet Tubman, so successful at doing what you did?
Because I was good at what I did. I don't know the answer. I had the fire in my belly for freedom. I had the hand of the good Lord in my hand. And so I believe it was that allowed me to do the things that I did without ever being captured.
Were there a lot of times that you would say a prayer, appeal to the Lord?
More than one time. You better believe that. Yes, sir. A prayer was continually in my mouth for the safety of my passengers and me, of course.
Well, I want to read a quote, and I'm not going to do a very good job of quoting you, but this is something that I've seen in a newspaper here.
What newspaper was that?
Well, I don't know, one of the New York papers, I believe.
Oh, all right.
And here it is. "'Twant me, 'twas the Lord. I always told him, I trust to you, I don't know where to go or what to do, but I expect you lead me, and he always did."
I believe I kind of said something like that to you earlier when we was talking, that where the good Lord leads you, he will not leave you, and he has never left me yet. So that kind of got the sense, I guess, of what I'm talking about. Yes, it was faith in the good Lord.
And in fact, one of the names that you got, I believe, was the Moses of her people. Does that sound familiar?
Because you know the story of Moses and the Israelites, that he led his people from slavery to freedom. And since I, Harriet Tubman, led my folks from slavery to freedom, folks call me Moses too.
Looks like you didn't mind that too much.
No, I think if you could be called by the name of someone in the good book, who was a good person, because not everybody in the good book is good, as you know. I think it's something to be, it'll be okay.
Okay, I want to ask you a couple questions about the war. The War of Rebellion.
Yes,
And
I had a small role in that war, because I was a scout, like I said, and a spy, and a nurse for Mr. Lincoln's army.
tell us a little bit more about being a spy.
Well, because I had been all down in some areas of the Confederacy, the generals, Mr. Lincoln's generals, some of them got to be friendly with me, and they would ask me to go out and do a little scouting and see what I could learn about what the Confederates was going to be doing next. And so I did that with a great deal of success, because who would ever think a little colored woman would be doing that kind of, I believe they called it intelligence work.
Oh, that's a nice military term for it, yes.
That's what I heard the general say. It was intelligence.
So it's just a matter of applying the same skills that you'd always had and helping people find freedom. When the war first started, though, President Lincoln made it very clear that in that first year or so of the war, that the war wasn't necessarily about slavery, it was about the Union. Any thoughts or feelings that you had about that, what the war was initially being fought about?
Well, of course, it was good that it was for the preservation, I believe was the word they used, of the Union, because it was important. But over time, I think it took a switch, and it's come to be about something else.
Yeah, and obviously the Emancipation Proclamation changed everything.
Sure did.
How did you and your people feel when you heard that news?
There was such jubilation. It was like the day of Jubilee had come. Absolutely. That was the best thing. Because John Brown, who was a martyr for my people, and Mr. Lincoln, they right up there as the best white folks in the world, in my opinion. They have done more for my people than any other white person I know of.
Of course, the war ended with victory for the Union and also ended with the assassination of the president.
That was a sad day for us, because we wasn't for sure what was going to happen to us next. We really wasn't. But you see, Mr. Lincoln had started out with that 13th Amendment before he went on to glory. And it was that 13th Amendment that kind of made us all, I guess you would say, breathe a sigh of relief that we never could be returned to slavery. So it took that proclamation, that surrender, and that 13th Amendment to really abolish slavery in these here United States.
Okay, did you ever have a chance to meet the president?
You know, folks have asked me that, and I've always answered in this way. At the time that I was doing my work, and even after the war ended, I was still a fugitive slave in the most technical sense. So how it's going to look for the President of the United States to be, how would you say, fraternizing with a fugitive slave? So the short answer is no, but that's the reason why. I knowed about him, he knowed about me, but no, we never did meet. But he did meet my friend Sojourner.
Sojourner Truth. And he knew Frederick Douglass very well.
Yes, he did, because they was in the White House with him. They had a meeting in the White House with the president.
Well, kind of bring us up to the end of where you're at in your life right now.
Well, at the close of the war, you heard of the Freedmen's Bureau?
Right.
Well, that's where I devoted my time after the war. I worked with the Freedmen's Bureau, kind of helping those former slaves learn how to be free. That's kind of what the Freedmen's Bureau was for. Teach the freedmen how to take care of themselves and get work and be in charge of their money. themselves. But the best thing they did, that Freedmen's Bureau, was taught them former slaves how to read and write. That was the best thing. Another thing they did at that Freedmen's Bureau was try to get the families back together that had been separated by that slavery thing. You know, for a while, they was trying to help me find my sisters who had been sold off years before, but they wasn't helpful in that. They couldn't do that. I don't know whatever become of my sisters. And they made them marriages between the slaves of jumping the broom. They made them be legal in the face of white men. So those were things that the Freedmen's Bureau done, and that's also where I met my current husband.
Well, tell us a little bit about him.
Well, his name is Nelson. Nelson Davis. You ever heard of him?
No, I haven't.
Well, Nelson was born a slave, you see. And Nelson was born in the deep South. That's what we call Mississippi. But around about the time of that proclamation, he heard about it, you see. And it said something to the effect that if any escaping slave can get to a place in the Confederacy that is being occupied by Union troops, if that slave could get there, vow his allegiance to the Union Army, and fight for the cause of freedom, then at the close of the war, he'd be free. Well, my Nelson heard about that, and he decided he was going to make a run for his freedom. He went all the way to Beaufort, South Carolina, 1863, 1864, somewhere in there. And at that time, Beaufort, South Carolina was certainly being occupied by Union troops. But he vowed his allegiance, and he joined up in the 2nd South Carolina Colored Troops, United States Colored Troops, because that was part of that proclamation too, from Father Abraham, that's what we called it. And so he joined up with that regiment, and he served till the end of the war. Yes, he did. But not only my Nelson, but nigh unto 200,000 of my people served with the United States Army and the United States Navy during that war. So our freedom wasn't just given to us. We fought for it as well, you see. So then at the close of the war, me and Nelson, we was both down there with the Freedmen's Bureau in Beaufort, and he kind of took a liking to me. Just like John Tubman did all them years ago. And so I decided to go back to Auburn. That's where I live. Did you know that that was where one of Mr. Lincoln's secretaries of the cabinet, he lived there in Auburn.
Seward, I believe.
It would be Seward. Him and I is good friends. We knowed each other for a long time. He's a staunch abolitionist too. Sold me a house. Nevertheless, followed me all the way back up to Auburn. And so me and Nelson, we got married. We got married up in 1869, so we just been married 2 or 3 years now.
Well, it's not hard to see why Nelson was smitten with you, but I'm going to ask you a rather indelicate question here.
Indelicate?
Is Nelson a bit younger than you?
Folks always want to. What they don't want to know, they can tell. Nelson is now about 20 years my junior. Yes, he is.
Okay. Well, you've done well for yourself then.
Yes, I think so, I have. Me and Nelson got married up in the Christian way. We got married up in a church. Yes, we did.
How successful were you in all these trips then of getting your family back together again?
On my last trip in 1859, 1860 or so, I went back to Dorchester County, Maryland. Well, Master Brodus, he died. I didn't shed near a tear for him, but he died, but he'd sold his property to a man whose name was Old Doc Thompson. And at that time, Old Doc Thompson had some property that meant a great deal to me. So on my last trip, I went right back to Dorchester County, Maryland, right back to Old Doc Thompson's plantation. Spirited off to freedom, my mama and my papa brought them all the way up into Auburn with me where they could be free. Even took old Doc Thompson's wagon for the first leg of my journey.
So you've gotten your brothers out, you've gotten your parents out, you've gotten some other relatives out as well?
Nieces, nephews, things like that, and just folks that I really they wasn't no blood to me, but they needed to be free as well.
Do you have a figure overall, how many you brought into freedom?
Well, I've heard numbers as high as 200, 300. I really don't know, because I never was counting. It was however many was there and however wanted to go with me. That's how many I took.
Well, it truly is a remarkable story. I wonder if you have any advice for us now, this short a time after the war, the rebellion, for the future, especially for the future of the relations between the various races.
If we could just all get to know one another as people, there ain't that much difference between you and me. And if we all are on the same side for the cause of freedom, it would seem like things ought to go along pretty well. That'd be my thought.
Okay. Thank you very much, Harriet. We appreciate the chance.
You're certainly welcome. I was very honored to be here today. Thank you, Mr. Depew.
You bet. Now, we're going to take a very abrupt change to things. And we are now on January 10th, 2011 in Springfield, Illinois.
Okay.
And I still am who I was before, and you are obviously Kathryn Harris. So
yes.
Thank you very much for having the opportunity to do this. This has been a lot of fun.
I'm going to take these gloves off because my hands are hot. I have a nice fingernail polish. And take the scarf off. Whew, it feels so much better.
So, now that we changed gears, let's talk about the place we chose here. And I think you were the one who came up with this location. Tell us where we're at.
We are in the old state capitol in the governor's reception room. Mr. Lincoln, for example, and other governors up until up until the building was no longer used. This is where the governor received his guest, and this is where Mr. Lincoln learned, I think it was in this room, that he learned that he and Mary had been elected to the presidency. Because I think he said, Mary, we have been elected.
It was a partnership.
Exactly. So this is the governor's reception room where the war governor at the time of the war of the rebellion was Richard Yates. So this is where he would receive people and guests and visitors and political dealings and things of that nature.
Well, let's go back to Harriet Tubman. How did you end up being Harriet Tubman, becoming Harriet and playing her to scores of different groups
You're right.
across the Illinois and the country?
Actually, it kind of has a connection to this building even. The library used to be in the basement, so to speak, and Carol Andrews was the site manager here. And the old state capitol staff had an outreach program to a local elementary school that still goes on today, Isles Elementary School. And part of their curriculum, I think they're in the fifth and sixth grade, they learn about the era of the war, being the Civil War. And so they have reenactors go and talk to the children, and they talk about daily life and the military and all of those kinds of things with the children. And one of the things that the children wanted to learn about in reference to the Civil War was about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. So Carol had seen me portray another historical figure for the Sangamon County Historical Society cemetery walk, and she said, Kathryn, I didn't know you were a bit of a ham. Maybe you can be Harriet Tubman for the children over at Isle School. Well, I said, why not? Why not?
It's kind of flattering to play one of the most important
Absolutely.
figures of the 19th century.
I had admired Harriet Tubman probably since I was in the 5th or 6th grade, so I thought it would be a challenge, and I was uniquely situated in the library to have access to all the information that I needed, or that I thought I'd need. So that was like in October. That was when our cemetery walk was. And I said, Carol, when is when do you do this with the children? Oh, she said it's in March, so you got about 6 months. Well, it was really like 5 months. So I made baby steps and learned. I read everything I could find in our library at that time about Harriet Tubman.
Now, what year would this be again?
This was like toward the end of the 90s, like maybe, what is wrong with these glasses? 1998, somewhere along in there, I think. I could be wrong, but it was about that time, because I know we had not moved to the new library building, because we were still over here. And so that's how that came to pass. I started by, I developed a monologue to just tell, and I told the story as Harriet Tubman. And then when I finished with my monologue, then I would come out of character and answer questions from the children. And the children are much tougher audiences than adults all the time. And the children taught me something too. You saw when I took my gloves off, because the gloves are very hot. Early on, when I was being Harriet Tubman, I was over at Isle School, and the children were really getting into the story, and they were really asking good questions. And the room was like 106 degrees, it seemed like. It was extremely hot. And I took my gloves off, and one little girl said, "You're not the real Harriet Tubman because you have on red fingernail polish." Taught me a lesson, that if I'm going to be Harriet Tubman, I have to be Harriet Tubman. I cannot get out of character. I will always remember that.
Is that what changed when you answered the questions? You then answered the questions as Harriet?
Mm-hmm. But she knew I couldn't be the real Harriet Tubman, because Harriet didn't wear red fingernail polish. Taught me a good lesson.
Okay. Harriet, I assume, also didn't wear glasses, but there are some things you have to make.
There are some things that you have to deal with, and otherwise I wouldn't be able to see nothing.
Well, that leads to the question, how did you get the look of Harriet Tubman right?
This book that was written by Sarah Bradford, who we talked about initially, has a drawing, and I do have a coat that is about this long, and then there's her rifle. This shows her during the time of the war, however, but pretty much in other images she looks the same way, and you see she has on the bandana, scarf, or whatever. So this particular dress, one of my friends and colleagues in IHPA, Cindy Feener, who's now retired, she made this for me. It's a period costume.
You've already answered this to a certain extent, but I wonder how the typical response you get from the audiences. And let's start with adults, first of all. Mm-hmm. How do audiences, the adults, respond to this typically?
It's really kind of cool, because the same monologue that I do for fifth graders, I do the same one with adults, and they respond just as well, just as interested as the kids in the fifth grade.
Okay. What is it about being Harriet Tubman, you think, that still resonates so well with both audiences, with Americans today, this far removed from the war?
I think that Harriet's bravery, Harriet's commitment to a cause, and she was definitely committed to the cause of freedom, and the fact that she, I guess you could say, she put her money where her mouth was. And she really did something. She was so adamant about freedom that she risked her life. I'm sure I don't know anyone who would, well, our servicemen do that every day, but just a regular person on the street who would risk his life for a cause, not once, not twice, but numerous times for something they believe in. And so I think that is what captures people's imagination, so to speak, and caused Harriet to be so much admired.
Is that the central thing about Harriet Tubman that you want to convey to the public then?
The commitment to a cause, yes, and the desire that, I suppose, she was one person, but she did indeed make a huge difference in the history of our country. So I guess.
And this is a great opportunity to teach the public not just about Harriet Tubman, about the institution of slavery and about the circumstances that they lived. Mm-hmm. Is there any one or two things that you especially want to convey to the public about that era and that institution?
The people in the South called, or was it the people in the North? But it was often called that peculiar institution, as you know. And it was peculiar, but it was terrible. The separation of the family, the ripping apart of a mother from her child, the awfulness, if that's a word, of the whole situation. But at the same time, it was awful. Thank God there were abolitionists and people, including our president, who eventually saw the evilness and what it did to our country, caused us to go to war, and it was over. But the owning, I can't imagine owning a person. You know, you can own a chair, you can own a table, you can own a car, a house, but owning a person, that's hard to get my pea brain around, even today.
Mm-hmm. Of course, that's the thing that our founding fathers struggled with so much and had talk about the peculiar language of property and being a 3/5 of a person,
exactly.
And things like that.
All of that. And what did, just last night, the speaker at the museum, Mr. Levine, Bruce Levine, in one of the comments that he made was that the presidents, except for two, up until the time of Buchanan, had all been either slave holders or allies with folks who were. That gives you pause to think about that. But then, much as you said, the founding fathers wrote those things in the Constitution about 3/5 of a person and being property.
You've said that you've read extensively, and obviously from the first time you played it, you've read
even more,
a lot more about
yes.
it. Tell us about the historiographical, or just tell us about the various books that you would recommend people to read.
Right. The very first adult biography, academic biography, so to speak, of Harriet Tubman was published in 1943. And it's by a man whose name is Earl Conrad, published in 1943. He had a hard time getting it to be published, and it ultimately was published by an African-American press, which no longer exists today. But children's books have always been popular for Harriet Tubman because of the things we just talked about earlier, her bravery and her courage and her commitment to a cause. So it really was not until two things happened in the world of academia, I think, to get Harriet Tubman back in the spotlight. That was the interest in African American history and the interest in women's history, and with Harriet, you get a twofer. So, I think it was 2003, that would be 60 years, right, from 1943, Kathryn Clinton wrote a biography about Harriet Tubman. It's got Promised Land in the subtitle, I think.
I wonder if we can do something unusual here and ask one of the video crew to grab the book that I've got right over there and hand that to Kathryn, because that's the book that you had recommended that I should be using.
Right. Harriet Tubman, called The Road to Freedom. And this is by Kathryn Clinton. It's one of the best biographies about Harriet Tubman. And then there was like a little flurry. There's another one by, another book about Harriet Tubman by Kay Larson. There's another one by a lady whose last name is Humez. And then there's one by Beverly Lowry. Beverly Lowry is most known for writing fiction. And her book about Harriet Tubman, she calls it an imagining book because it has conversations in it. So it's not really fiction because it is historically based. But the conversations are certainly made up because nobody knows what Harriet Tubman said. So there are at least 4 good adult-length scholarly biographies of Harriet Tubman now. But when I started, all I had was Earl Conrad's book and the 2 editions of Harriet's biography. The first one published in 1869, and then it was reprinted with some changes in 1898. And Harriet used the proceeds from the books for the upkeep of her old folks' home.
Has there been any significant evolution in your own views or thoughts about Harriet Tubman since you first started playing her?
I have we always heard, at least I did when I was growing up in elementary school, that Harriet freed 300 slaves. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. And more recent scholarship has called that into question. The numbers, to me, are unimportant. What she did is much more significant. And there is a book that talks about, I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head right now. I think it's Surnet or something like that. He talks about the mythology that surrounds Harriet Tubman. And it does make you look at her and not denigrate what she did, but it puts it in a more truthful format than what all the mythology that is surrounding not only Harriet, but the Underground Railroad itself.
There is a quote that I saw where Harriet is stated as saying that she had saved thousands.
In a way, and that could be true, because she did save or set free close to 800 people when she was in a raid. She may still be the only woman, but at the time, during the war, she went on a raid. His name was General Saxon, down on the I never heard anybody say it, so I don't know how to say it. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. The Combahee River in South Carolina, and they freed like 800 slaves on the plantations that were in that area. So maybe that's where the thousands came from. But that was during the war, when she was a scout and a spy in the Army.
Well, you already said that she didn't have any education in ciphering, so would thousands even have much relevance to her other than just a
whole bunch of people? Probably not.
Okay. Part of the challenge I know in playing this is there's so many things about her and her life that are very vague, and I would assume that, hey, I put you on the spot a couple times myself. Are you having to kind of elaborate based on knowing her as well as you do and trying to answer some of the questions that you get?
Right. I kind of put Harriet in, I have to take what people ask me in the context of what I know about the time, about her personally, but about what was going on around her. So it might be like a composite answer as opposed to a strictly black ink on white paper, it says it on page whatever of X book. Because Harriet, since she was illiterate, she left no record because she couldn't read or write. So what is known about her is based on what she is known to have said, which was reported in lots of the northern newspapers and by her nieces and nephews.
Yeah, you managed to turn the tables on me and ask me what paper I had seen that in. Shame on you, Harriet. Okay, well, another, I guess along the same lines here then, you've talked a little bit about how your own views of her have changed, evolved to a certain extent. Do you think that having embodied Harriet Tubman so much gives you a special insight in who she was?
I kind of think so. I don't know if that sounds, I'm not sure what it might sound like. But no, I think that if you are a reenactor or a first-person presenter, which is, and this can be called either of those, I think the more you know about the person who you're representing, and the more you learn about them, and you can get in your head how you think that person might have thought, spoke, all of those things. But you have to really You have to really dig deep within yourself to get to that place.
And it's probably worthwhile to note that here in Springfield, we have a plethora of Lincoln
Yes.
reenactors who
We
do the
do.
same kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
So it might be fun sometime to talk to a couple of those about the same kind of experiences.
Absolutely.
I want to finish off with something that just occurred to you within the last few months. I wonder if you can tell us about your trip out to Washington, D.C.
I felt like I was on a cloud. I had to keep pinching myself the whole time I was there. I was fortunate enough to be invited to participate in the annual leadership conference for the Congressional Black Caucus in Washington, D.C. I had been invited to a Juneteenth celebration up in Waukegan, Illinois this summer. And it just so happened that one of the ladies who was organizing the event was also affiliated with a program called the National Coalition for Faith and Justice. And they have historically participated in the Congressional Black Caucus's annual leadership conference. And they, at this particular time, they are providing people information about the Underground Railroad. And so it was just fortuitous that I happened to be in Waukegan with Miss Murky being there and she being a part of that coalition. And it just all kind of fell into place. Now, she asked me when I was there in June, she told me about the program that she was working on for September. And she said, do you think you'd be interested in it? I said, sure. Yeah, just let me know when it's going to be and where it's going to be and whatever, and I'll be glad to participate. So I had forgotten about it, and about the middle of August, she called me and said, you remember that program I told you about? Well, we're putting the final touches on it, and we want you to come. I said, oh, sure, good. Where's it going to be in Waukegan? She said, it's not in Waukegan, Kathryn. It's in Washington, D.C. You could have blown me over with a feather. I was just flabbergasted. And so I went, at their expense, of course, to Washington, D.C., and I was a highlight, I was told, in hindsight, of that conference out there. We had a room that seated like 300 people, and there were people lining the walls. I mean, it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. I had the opportunity not only to meet, well, the school children who they arranged to be there. That was truly fun.
Because you were going to be there?
Uh-huh. Yes. They wanted children to see me, and so they arranged for, I think it was like 100 and some odd school kids from like 2 or 3 schools in the Washington, D.C. area to come. But as a part of the program, I was fortunate enough to meet, it was sponsored by, her name is Corrine Brown. She's one of the representatives from the state of Florida. She was the hostess for this particular session. I had the opportunity to meet the past secretary for the National Park Service. I met the chaplain of the U.S. Senate. It was just absolutely incredible. I was honored and humbled to have been able to do that.
And when you first started, you could probably have never imagined something like that.
None of that. Not at all. Not
Well,
at
this
all.
has been a great experience for me, and I hope that people get a chance to hear and watch this down the road. Any final comments? How would you like to finish off with this?
I'd just like to say thank you for asking me to do this. I have enjoyed it. I hope that the things that I said will be helpful to someone along the way. And if they want to learn more about Harriet, guess what they should do? Go to their local library.
Spoken like a true librarian.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Harriet and Kathryn both.
Thank you.
And that concludes our session, and thank you for joining us today.